Okay, hello everyone. Can you hear me okay? Hopefully, yes. Okay, good. Welcome everyone to the Latinos in Law at Law School Admissions Panel, day one. We're going to have UC Berkeley Law School and UC Irvine admissions teams talk about their admissions process, and we can propose them a few questions and get their feedback. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So we'll go ahead and start first with doing introductions for board members that are here on this call so that you can go get to know who's going to be administering this meeting. So for our board members, we're just going to state our name, our year, our major, any fun fact that we want to throw out there, especially regarding our position. So I can go ahead and get started. So again, bienvenidos, welcome everyone for coming to our Law School Admissions Panel here at UC Berkeley on behalf of Latinos in Law. My name is Eric Esparza, soy el president and the founder of Latinos in Law. I am a senior majoring in legal studies. Like many of you probably on this call or who are watching the recording, I'm pre-law, planning to go to law school to become a prosecutor or a public defender. Of course, all depends on what that experience is like once I'm in law school. And that's a bit about me, so I'll go ahead and pass it over to Nicole to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Nicole Carrasco, and I'm Secretary for Latinos in Law. I'm a fourth year studying society and environment, and I hope to pursue medical law. Specifically, I want to do medical malpractice. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Yesenia.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Yesenia. I'm a third year and I'm a legal studies major. I'm the co-finance director for this team and I'm planning to go to law school as well to become a criminal defense attorney.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Gonzalez. I am the Vice President of Latinos in Law. I am currently interested in pursuing a law career at the appellate level, maybe being an appellate attorney or a research attorney. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you all for our board members for introducing themselves. Now we want to go ahead and allow our amazing panelists that are here with us tonight to introduce themselves. So for our panelists, very similar to what we were able to do, simply state your full name, pronouns if you prefer, and what school you're representing, and any fun fact that you would want to throw out there. It could be whether an academic fact or just a fun fact about your personal lives. So with that, I'll go ahead and let Kristen start us off.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having us. I'm Kristen Thies-Alvarez. I'm the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Berkeley Law. I oversee all of the JD admissions functions and then financial aid for the whole school. So that includes LLM, JSD, and JSP students in addition to the JD students. I've been at Berkeley Law since 2007, but my connection to Berkeley goes much farther than that. I actually attended Berkeley Law, or excuse me, not Berkeley Law. I attended Berkeley as an undergrad. I was a double major in rhetoric and Native American studies, but fun fact, I guess, is that I also was a summer bridge participant, which is where I met my husband, Ruben, who is also in education. He's the chief academic officer for Berkeley Unified School District.
Perfect. Thanks so much for it. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Estuardo. So Estuardo, same thing, full name, pronouns, what school you're representing, and any fun fact that you'd want to throw out there.
Yes, thank you. My name is Buenas noches. My name is Estuardo Ponciano. My pronouns are he, him, and él. And I am the Executive Director of Community Programs at UC Irvine School of Law. And so in that function, I oversee the law school's pipeline initiatives. And so we have the pre-law outreach program that's what we might be aware of, which is for college students. We have a Saturday Academy of Law, which is for high school students. And we also have we are part of the Community College Pathway to Law initiative. And that's why I oversee all these different projects. And I also assist with admissions. And before that, I was in admissions for since 2009 when the law school opened, and worked with Kristen's current dean. Yes, and that's I guess an interesting fact about me.
Thank you so much for the two of you for, of course, coming here tonight, taking your time to speak of what the admissions process is like, answering our questions. We know that we're coming into the rounds of when people are submitting their law school applications, or whether or not you're applying this year, next year, or whenever it may be. Of course, any information we get tonight is very valuable. So thank you again for coming tonight. So we also do want to quickly mention to folks who are either here live, who are watching the recording, that we will be sharing the for becoming a member for Latinos in Law, so that you can get full access to these recordings and to any other resources that we provide to you. So Alex, who's using my computer at the moment, will go ahead and post some important links that you all should be saving. So the links are the membership form to become a member for Latinos in Law, the mailing list form to get updates when this recording will be uploaded to our Facebook and Instagram pages, and more importantly, the list for you to be able to join our Slack channel, and which will be announcing any events like this that may be coming up very soon. So it's a lot more manageable and easier to share that information rather than posting it on social media. But with that, we want to go ahead and transition over to now the main bulk of this event, which is, of course, asking our amazing panelists some questions regarding the law school admissions process and getting some tips, advice, and great answers from them. So for those of you who haven't attended a law school admissions panel quite yet, and for those who have, it's going to be quite similar to that, in the sense that we have what you would call pre-prepared questions that we have already emailed to our admissions officers, which we'll be asking during the first 30 to 40 minutes of this event. They'll be answering their questions by simply unmuting themselves, giving a response, and then of course we'll move on to the next question. Around 7 p.m., we'll go ahead and transition over to our Q&A session, in which you, the audience members, will be able to ask your questions by simply either one, using the raising hand function on Zoom, or simply posting your question in the chat. Either way works. So if you have any questions throughout this event before we get into the Q&A session, please write them down and be sure to ask them during our Q&A session. And of course, for panelists, as I mentioned, once I ask the first question, simply go ahead and mute yourselves, answer it to the best of your ability, and we can go ahead and move on from there. So with that, we can go ahead and move on to our first question, which will be answered by Alex.
So our first question is, how would you categorize or how would you characterize the social climate and students at your school?
I guess I can take this. I'll try to answer this first. So I think, law school has things that are fairly in common pretty much wherever you're going to go to law school. It's because the pedagogy, the way things are taught, the way classes are structured, the Socratic method, all of that is relatively universal. You might have some professors at different law schools who might employ these more, but for the most part, things are very similar. And the reality is that the process of learning the law and for that matter, the profession of law in a lot of ways tends to be adversarial, right? It's based on parties opposing each other in court. What you're writing is usually in response to someone else. And so I think there is a natural tendency for people to be competitive. With that said, I don't think law school has to always be a competitive environment. And I think it's at UCI, for example, our faculty, our staff, and even our students, the students have really tried to create a culture over the years that emphasizes much more the collaborative nature of law, working on projects together, working on pro bono projects together, working in the clinics together. Our students are required to work to participate in a clinic before they graduate from law school. And so all of this work that they're doing that is hands-on, I think helps create a sense of community, because students are working not just for, the brass ring. They're not just working for like who's going to be number one, but they're working on cases, on projects, on initiatives, on issues that they really care about. And often are the reasons that they've come to law school, right? All of you are going to write these amazing personal statements for us that tell us why you're coming to law school and what has motivated you, what has prompted you. And unfortunately, sometimes that can get lost when you get to law school, because you're so busy trying to keep up with outlining, trying to keep up with all the, with your exams, with office hours, with things that are new, and just trying to feel like you're keeping your head above water. But by getting involved in these co-curricular activities, whether they're required or whether you go to a law school where it's not required, I think I think we would all encourage you to do that, because it will help keep, number one, it will help you keep in mind and see the power that you already have as a law student to affect change on someone's life. But also it'll help keep things in perspective, and that yes, grades are important. Doing well is important, but it is not the only reason you're there. You're there to learn and to grow. And if you can do it in an environment that is collaborative, that is supportive, where students work together, where you go to the faculty and you don't feel necessarily that they're being, that someone's hiding the ball from you, trying to intentionally make it more difficult, then I think that will go a long way to creating this kind of environment. So I'm confident in saying that UCI, that's the culture that we've, all of us that are part of that community, have tried to create for our students. And I think when you see these student organizations, the other, which we can talk about later, the different resources available to students, I think it shows the school's commitment to creating an environment or fostering an environment that is much more collaborative and supportive versus competitive.
That was a super comprehensive answer, and apologies if you can hear dog barking in the background. This is what happens if it's 6:21 at night from my house. So I would summarize the Berkeley Law community maybe using 3 words. It's a really diverse community. It's an extremely engaged community. And it's a community that sort of the through line, or what connects everyone, despite all of that diversity, is an interest in advancing and working towards public good. So, in terms of diversity, there's lots of ways to characterize that. Some ways are quite obvious. You can talk about the fact that, the school is over 60% people who identify as female. It's actually a majority students who do not identify as being white. It's, usually over 20% who are first-gen college or first-gen professional school, over 25% who identify as members of the LGBTQIA+ community. It's also diverse in the sense that the average age is 25. So a lot of people have experience outside of their undergraduate careers. It's a majority not California residents. That varies from year to year. We don't really have any way in which we control residency at all. So it just depends, but it's certainly a school that enrolls people from across this country and actually across the world. So there's a significant number of international students as well. And then it's diverse in terms of area of curricular interest. We have a number of very strong programs, and most people who are interested in Berkeley are interested also in how different areas of law are connected to one another. And it's also diverse in terms of sort of ideological diversity. There are a lot of people with a lot of different viewpoints who are coming from different lived experiences and who are drawn to the law for a variety of reasons. So the things that they have in common are a sort of deep sense of engagement, or a desire to kind of roll up their sleeves and get to work. And part of what attracts them then to Berkeley is that we really embrace that and offer a variety of things in the first year that are typically reserved only for second and third year students at many other schools. So we will allow people to join one of the 40 different student initiated legal projects, which are student run clinics, in their first year. You can join 12 of the 13 journals in your first year, and you could try out for the competition teams or board of advocates if that's something that you're interested in pursuing. A couple of you mentioned being interested in criminal practice, sort of defense or prosecution side, which is, one way of describing that is litigation. So being in a courtroom as opposed to transactional work, which is often sort of deal making, contracts, et cetera. And then practicing that skill becomes, relatively important. So people want to sort of not be sidelined for 3 years. Again, I think partly informed by their lived experience and maybe their work experience or their educational experience. They have some sense, not necessarily of what kind of lawyer they want to be, because I think you should keep an open mind about that. You will learn a lot about what you're interested in along the way. But they have a sense that there are things that they care about, and they don't stop caring about them because they walk through the entrance to the Berkeley Law building. So they continue to work in those fields, and they continue to be very, very engaged, as well as engaged in the leadership and direction of the law school. And then the reality is that most people will not necessarily graduate and go into a public service job. But what most students at Berkeley Law share in common is a recognition that part of what draws them to the power of law is a desire to work towards the betterment of society, to address some of the structural and systemic ills that are around us, and to make the world a better place. As sort of like, generic and cheesy as that sounds, I think it's actually a really poignantly felt and lived sentiment. And so over 95% of the students typically every year will participate in pro bono work in the first year. And so again, even though at outcomes you see that 2/3 of the people are going into some form of private practice, the reality is that nearly 100% of the students are engaged with public service work from the minute that they get there. And we could have pushed back on the idea, or that notion, that doing private practice means that you're not doing public service work. The reality is there are lots of ways to combine those things. And we think anyone who graduates from Berkeley and anyone who enters the profession should have a clear understanding of what an attorney's role is in terms of supporting indigent clients, being a member of the larger bar and community, and working to advance rule of law and access to justice.
Thank you both. Thank you both for your very in-depth and well-explained first kind of preview of what your law schools would look like for students. Kind of continuing on the same line of questioning. We also are putting in titles. Hopefully everyone can see the, okay, great, below. We have, what does diversity mean at your law school, and what is the diversity of your law school's faculty members specifically? And I'll go ahead and paste that in the chat as well.
Well, I kind of already answered the question about diversity, which is to say that I give a lot of examples that are sort of outside of just racial and ethnic diversity. I mean, I think the term is relatively diffuse as it pertains to law school. And so it's a really interesting and I think worthwhile question to ask any school. Because you may be thinking that you're asking, are there going to be people who sound and look like me and come from families like my family? And the law school may be like, there's people from all over the world with interests in lots of different things, right? And so it's useful to kind of ask, I think, the really specific question that you mean, because the term is very broad. And I think the term is very broad, and that's a positive thing. But just like everyone's invited to write a diversity statement, we get to read everybody's sort of like understanding of what they think that means and what they think they're going to bring and how they might contribute in terms of the diversity of the classroom. And so it's pretty broad, and it's been, I learn something every year, which is helpful. I won't go into details about sort of like what I think the diversity is, since I already talked about it. But we obviously, as an institution also that is in a state where Proposition 209 is in effect, we cannot explicitly take into consideration race or ethnicity in the admissions process. And so it's not about kind of checking a box. It is about a specific question that we ask and give you the option to answer, which is, how is your perspective unique and shaped by your experiences, and how will you bringing that perspective into the classroom contribute to the community and to the learning environment? So that's what we're trying to gain, is sort of like, what is the diversity that you have and bring with you look like in action? And how are the conversations going to be better informed by that? In terms of diversity of law school faculty, I'm going to punt slightly. I can put the stats or a link to some of that information. What's tricky about that is actually the word faculty. So if you're asking about tenured full-time faculty members, you'll get one answer. If you're talking about faculty including clinically, about faculty, including lecturers or anyone who teaches or affiliated faculty with centers, et cetera, you'll get a different answer. And so the reason I'm not trying to sort of like obfuscate, be difficult, but actually you get really different information. And I think it's worthwhile to ask tenure and tenure track, because maybe that signals to you like something about the institution's commitment to diversity. But it's also the case that student experience might be just as informed by the clinical faculty and the lecturers that they're interacting with. So I'll put something in the chat and then I'll hand it over to Eduardo.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate Kristen's answer about the faculty, because I agree. It is very it's complex to define the diversity. So I'm similarly going to paste that in the chat so that you all can see it for yourselves. And I agree 100% that looking at that list and being able to think about what that means in terms of who has tenure, who has been, or, who is considered a full-time tenured professor versus who isn't. That raises interesting questions about the institutions that are certainly worth talking about, but it's a much broader topic than we have in the next half hour. So, but in terms of diversity and what that means, UCI, at UCI, we strive for inclusive excellence. And what that means is and that's a term that you might have heard used before. But what it means is essentially we are trying to build a class that reflects the lived experiences of our community, our entire community. And so it's in a similar way. I actually appreciate, as Kristen mentioned regarding AB or Prop 209. One thing that I really appreciate about that is that it takes away this idea that has always been wrong, in my opinion, that people are being admitted or being given special consideration on account of race. Like, it is not race that we are using by itself. We don't just say, oh, we're going to take X number of Latinos, X number of Black students, X number of Asian students, or X number of native students. That has never really been how we operate. And so I'm glad that AB 209, in a way, even though I want it to be overturned I also think I do think that it illustrates that we have been able to move forward and be thoughtful in our admissions, in our review of applications, and looking at people not just because of an identifier that they might check on a box, but rather for what that means, right? The example I always give students is that I don't write, in my application, if I were, if I'm an applicant, I'm never going to just say, oh, I'm Latino, check, I'm gay, check, admit me, right? Like, so, but rather, what is it about that? Like, what is it about those identities? How have they impacted my life? How have they impacted my opportunities? Whether they're professional, whether they're educational. It's getting into it's asking applicants and asking students to be thoughtful about what they bring to the table, what their experiences mean in the context of their education, in the context of their goals, of their dreams. What have they had to overcome? What maybe advantages do they think that they have had, right? I mentioned two of my identities, but I'm also a man. So there's some, I'm a cisgender man. And so that also might bring advantages, right? And so being thoughtful about that. And so I think in terms of diversity, we're looking not just at checking boxes and checking numbers, but we're really thinking about what is it that this person can contribute, what is their experience. And so for applicants, when you're looking at your at writing diversity statements, when you're looking at writing personal statements, it's really important to be thinking about, how to frame that, right? How do I share these experiences that I've had? What does it mean to have grown up where I grew up, or to have grown up speaking the language that I grew up with, or having grown up with, whether myself being undocumented or having family that is undocumented, or, how has that impacted my life? How has that impacted my opportunities? That is really where we get to see and where we truly can embrace diversity. And what is the school doing with that, right? Is the admissions committee considering that? And so I'm happy to report that we have continuously had classes that are diverse and representative of the population. Not as much as I would like, but certainly we're on our way. And so in terms of, yes, over the last few years, we've had majority female classes. We've had a majority of our student population identifies as something other than white. We have similarly strong first generation students. We have about over 20% of our students have self-identify as members of the LGBTQ community. So these are things that I think indicate the school's commitment to embracing viewpoints, embracing life experiences. But I think, again, beyond just, admission and numbers, I think what's important at the law school is do students have the the support to not just be admitted, but also to thrive in the law school. Is the law school providing an environment where students of diverse backgrounds, of diverse life experiences, are they able to find the support that they need to be successful once they get to law school? And I think that's the resources that the law school tries to offer in terms of the academic skills program, in terms of our first generation professionals program. Those are, to me, indicators or evidence, for lack of a better word, of the school's commitment to diversity, and not just, as well as, for example, the programs that I run, right? My pipeline programs that I work with are aimed at helping prepare students to get to law school, and the students that we're working with are usually underrepresented students, first gen students, minoritized students. And so that's something that I think when you look at diversity, like, you want to look at this broader picture, not just like the numbers are great. Obviously, that indicates that the school's doing well, right, and doing things. But at the same time, I think it's important to look even further, like Kristen was mentioning. Look at the faculty. Look at what that looks like. Look at the programs that the school's offering. How accessible are they, and are they meant to be accessible to the local communities?
So
That's an awesome echo.
transitioning to school-specific programs, but in a similar vein of, you were mentioning pipeline program, do you have any summer programs you can recommend from your specific law school for students interested in law but are still unsure of committing to a specific law school, but are looking for programs to become familiar with your law school before applying to your law school? And I'll go ahead and put this question also in the chat.
So since I just mentioned them, I'll start. So yes, and so one of the program, our flagship, so to speak, program at UCI Law is our pre-law outreach program. This is a program for college sophomores, juniors, on some occasions seniors, but students. The idea is for students that are in college at these stages, who are still thinking about law school. The program is not meant for students that are already like applying to law school like this coming fall, because by then it's a little bit, late. The program is not going to be as helpful, but it's for students that are still thinking about this as a possible option, because it is made up of different, it takes place over 6 Saturdays, and during those Saturdays, you're learning about the LSAT. You're learning about writing effective personal statements. You're hearing from the academic skills faculty at UCI. You're hearing from attorneys. You're hearing from law students. You're also learning about self-care and mental wellness. And we have someone from the counseling center at UCI who comes in and does a whole workshop on how to deal with the things that students, specifically underrepresented and minoritized students, might encounter when they get to law school, like imposter syndrome and attributional ambiguity, and all these issues that we know can be take up real estate in our heads, and then don't allow us to do as well when we're actually in class trying to do well in class, right? Because we've already got all these other things that we're having to contend with. And the idea is to help you be prepared, not just for the application, but to do well beyond that, right? To at least be equipped to know how to handle the stressors that you will encounter in law school. Another program, like I said, I mentioned, is for 9th grade students, and it's for it's our Saturday Academy of Law, which we work with 3 of the most underserved school districts here in Orange County, and our law students are involved with that as volunteers. We have undergraduate students as mentors in the program. We have faculty. And so similarly, it's to help students begin thinking about law school. If these are students that are primarily first gen, and who may have never been on a college campus. And so we really enjoy bringing them to campus and kind of letting them see that, hey, this is a place that is yours as much as it is anyone else's. And finally, like I mentioned earlier, we have we work with the California Law Pathway to Law School initiative with the community colleges. And so we've hosted, alongside some of my Southern California counterparts, summer boot camp that took place this summer. We're repeating it next summer. We had a Law Pathways Day in the fall, and we're having one in December again. So certainly, yes, different initiatives, pipeline initiatives to help our students that wish to hopefully come to UCI. But even if you don't come to UCI, we want to see you in law school regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I would largely say that most pipeline programs in general, while the school may appreciate and enjoy a benefit of people getting to know their school and maybe sending in an application that's a competitive one, most of us who do that work are interested in diversifying the profession. And so I ultimately will be very happy for you if we work together through a project and you decide that UCI is the right place for you, and you go to UCI and you thrive there and you graduate in 3 years and take the bar and reach your career goal, right? That's the objective. So I put a link in the chat to a page that describes some of our outreach partnerships. You know, as I read your question, partly because it asks about students interested in law, but who are still kind of unsure about law school, the program that we're partnered on that I would point people towards is the PPIA program. So on campus here at Berkeley, the Goldman School of Public Policy houses the PPIA program, or the Junior Summer Institute. It's geared towards students between their junior and senior years. So typically apply in the fall before you would begin. And it was really for students who wanted to go into public policy, but in recognition that so many students are thinking about public policy questions, but unsure as to whether or not they want to approach finding solutions through the policy route, through the advocacy and legislative route, or through the lawyering, or sort of like being an attorney route, that we partnered with them. And so we underwrite and fund a third of the spots in the PPIA program. In addition to the policy module, law faculty teach a legal module or a series of courses to introduce students who want to learn more about legal analysis and legal doctrine and certain areas of the law. We've done things like brought in alumni who do work both in the law policy space, or have law degrees who are mostly working in policy or doing some combination. And then we also do admissions presentations and work with people individually and keep in touch with them if you graduate from that program. So the incentive for us too is that anyone who applies and ultimately gets in is guaranteed sort of a minimum level of scholarship funding as a PPIA graduate. But again, some people will go through that program and decide that they don't want to go to law school. They want to make the change that they want to make by being a policy advocate or analyst. So that's just a really great space to get broad exposure to many of the different tools that might be able to help you make change that you're interested in making. And one of the qualifications is actually that sort of need, but not in the financial sense. You know, we actively, I sit in the admissions committee, and we actively will look at people and go, oh, this person's already taken like micro and macro and stats and this, like they're going to be fine, like 4.0. And we really want to focus on the student who needs the exposure and the training, and who this is going to provide a really unique opportunity for them to sort of clarify their goals and build their skill set. We've been partnered on that program for a really long time. It's a really wonderful opportunity. So if any of you watching this are thinking, you know, you don't have to be from Berkeley either. And I should say, there are not law fellows options anywhere except Berkeley, but there are PPIA programs at different institutions around the country. So in fact, there's one at Princeton, one at Carnegie Mellon, and some others. So there's the PPIA program is broader than just that. Yeah, I would definitely check it out if you're sort of thinking about clarifying your goals and just want to be in a space with people who are interested in some of the similar things you are. One of the key qualifications for PPI, however, and there are essays required and letters required, is a demonstrated commitment to working in and serving underserved communities, specifically African-American, Chicanx, Latinx, Native American, and Asian Pacific Islander. So you have to be able to articulate a demonstrated commitment to serving those underserved communities, whether or not you yourself are a member of them. And so even if your goals are to do that, but you don't have experience and haven't demonstrated a track record, then typically it's not someone who ends up being admitted to PPIA.
Okay, thank you both. The next question, again, similarly, but more specific for the Latinx and Hispanic community. What programs, if any, are available to Latinx and Hispanic students to help them navigate through law school, both before being accepted and being accepted as a student at your law school? And I'll go ahead and also post this.
The world of pipeline programs is incredibly large. It might not feel that way all the time. I'm trying to think about whether or not, like, other than like Latino justice and some of the work that they do, whether there's a Latino, Chicano, Hispanic focused program. I feel like there is, but they may be small and associated with bar associations. But let me just give you like a general one. So the Law School Admissions Council runs plus programs. Ironically, you have Stewie and I here. So I'm the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the Law School Admissions Council and a member of the Board of Trustees. And Stewie is on my committee, and I appointed him for a second consecutive term as the chair of our Pipeline and Outreach Programs Subcommittee. So he knows a lot about this, as do I, but LSAC runs a number of plus funded or LSAC funded programs. Some of those are in residence, so sort of like multiple week residential programs at different schools. They're starting to experiment, or we're starting to experiment with different options. And so I would definitely check out the website there if you aren't familiar with it. The other really great resource, in addition to schools themselves, and there are a number of other schools, including the other UCs, Davis or UCLA Law Fellows, which you might be familiar with. King Hall Outreach Program is the one at Davis, that do have longstanding, like their own really excellent pipeline programs. But other schools do also throughout the country. NYU and Harvard partners on a program called Trials, which is a really outstanding opportunity. And there are many others. But I would also look at law firms. A number of law firms, and two really good examples are SEO, and sort of like the SEO Catalysts Scholars Program, which includes placement and mentorship at law firms, but also MTO, Munger, Tolles, Olson, which runs a pipeline program housed out of their LA office, which has had really strong success and been longstanding in terms of its commitment. So they're also, they're interested in the diversity of the profession. They recognize they're not going to be great diverse associates for them to interview and hire if they don't invest on the front end in some way. So they figured that out a while ago and have been working on it. I don't know, Stewie, are you familiar with any that are like uniquely geared towards Latinx community?
I'm not too familiar with a lot that are specifically Latinx. I know, like you mentioned, Latino Justice here on the West Coast. I know the MABA, Mexican American Bar Association, has like a mentorship program for undergraduate students. And they're really the only one that I'm familiar with that is specifically geared. Now, there's a lot of programs that Kristen already mentioned, you know, that work with underserved populations in general, and that more broadly, I should say, and then that would, you know, that includes Latinx, Chicanx students. And so those were the ones that Kristen mentioned were the ones that I was thinking is look at plus. Another resource, and I will look it up in a second and post it, is AccessLex. AccessLex has a great has a list that they've been recently updating of pipeline programs from around the country. And so I think it's worth looking into all of these because there are, some of them have, you know, stipends attached to them, especially if they're residential, that make it easier for you to participate. Some of them are online or partially online, so that can kind of work with you if you are able to, if you are not able to like move for a residential program, or if it's not near you. So there's definitely a lot of programs out there that can be beneficial. And once you are in law school, you know, I think at your law school, you want to be looking at, you know, what academic resources, you know, like I mentioned earlier, we have something called the Academic Skills Program, which is meant for, actually it's meant for all of our first year students, but certainly I think there's great value in particular for first generation students, for students that feel like they might need a little bit more assistance. There's also, this is a program that is run by faculty who work with you to make sure that you it kind of works as a safety net, academic safety net for students. You have your professor in class, you might have your law student TAs, and the faculty in the academic skills program kind of comes in beyond that and says, okay, let's sit down, let's make sure that you're outlining, let's make correctly, let's make sure that you're understanding how IRAC works, let's make sure that you're understanding how this will translate to an exam. And so during the first year at UCI, this is mandatory for first year students. If students need it, they can be assigned tutors through ASP, and then ASP, and then you're welcome to continue using that as a second year, as a third year student. So, so that's one resource for for current students. And like I said, I believe a lot of law schools have these kinds of programs now. So I think it's worth looking at that. What kind of support is there once you get there? As I mentioned earlier, there's the first generation professionals group that is a student organization. We also have a Latinx Law Student Association at UCI that is mentored by faculty, by administrators at the law school who work as a support system for our students.
Thank you. Thank you both again. We're going to be concluding this with one final question. If you could give an inspiring law student, law applying student, one tip for their law school application, what would that be? So.
Nobody wants to go first. I think it's hard to boil it down to one tip. I'll say something that I have shared with others, which is to it's to dream big, but apply strategically. So what I mean by that is, like, I think there's a tendency when you're trying to navigate this space and you don't have a lot of lawyers to ask, you don't feel like you have a lot of access to people to ask your pointed questions, there's a tendency to go in one of two directions. One is to really be like, oh, well, I looked at the medians for that school and there's no way I'll ever get in because I don't have those numbers, so I won't apply, right? And in fact, I would encourage you to research schools kind of, at least initially, setting aside things like their GPA and LSAT median and just looking at their programs in the community and how they might support you and help you reach your goals and help you thrive, as Stewie suggested. Because the reality is, like, it's our job to evaluate your application. I don't want you to evaluate yourself out of consideration before you ever submit an application. I want you to apply to the schools that are your dream schools. That being said, it's a terrible strategy to be like, well, I'm going to apply to the top 12, and just send those in. Because if your goal is to be a practicing attorney, a graduate who passes the bar in 3.5 years, then you need to go to law school, right? And so you need to apply strategically, and you need to therefore have a sort of carefully crafted strategy, taking into consideration things even like the affordability of the application process. Where can you get fee waivers? Where are the schools that are your dream schools, but where are the schools that you feel pretty good about your chances? And where are the schools that you feel very good about your chances and you think you might get a big scholarship from them? And so you ultimately, like, my only goal for you in come March or April is to have choices, right? So to have a range of options to select from based on what's going to be the best place for you. And that's really for someone who's just thinking about it and they're not like literally in the application process right now. That's the best advice I can give you. Don't foreclose on your dream because somebody tells you nobody who looks like you or has your GPA or comes from your school or your background ever gets into those schools. They're just going to be wrong, right? Because unless they're us, they're not reading files and they don't see it and they don't make decisions. And at the same time, don't, put all of your, eggs in one basket and just do it at the last minute and go only for California schools or only for public schools or only for schools that seem inexpensive or only for schools that are top schools or whatever you want to say. Be really thoughtful and have several schools in kind of each of those categories. That will set you up for the most success long-term. Final note is as you can see, there are real people who work in admissions offices, and probably the least taken advantage of and most valuable resource you could possibly find would be us and our time. Most of us are excited and happy to talk to prospective candidates. It is not a fun conversation after you've already applied and not gotten in, but please, please, please reach out to us on the front end. We're happy to provide insight and information about our schools and opportunities. And I'm always shocked, since you guys are Berkeley, I'll tell you this bluntly, I'm always just frankly shocked at the low numbers of Berkeley students who are going to walk up the hill and make an appointment with our office. It's, you know, even within the legal studies department where it should be relatively easy, there's faculty who teach in both. And I don't know what it's like, a sense of not feeling entitled to take up the time or feeling intimidated, but please consider this an open invitation. You do not have to want to come to Berkeley Law to come and talk to me about what it takes to get to law school or how to write an effective personal statement. And in fact, we all know each other. So if your dream is UCI or NYU or UT Austin or Northwestern, the fact of those people are some of my closest friends, and I am more than happy to make the connection between you and my counterpart at those schools. So please take advantage of us.
Yes, I echo Kristen's comments. You know, this is the fun part of the job for me, and I think for pretty much all of my colleagues in admissions, this is why we do admissions, because we love working with students, we love helping you in your process, and so take advantage of that. Of that offer, and the same offer extends from me as well. Like, I'm happy to help, whether it's through Zoom or if you happen to be in town and you want to come in and meet in person, you know, or a phone call, whatever works for you. I'm happy to do that as well. And so I guess for me, the one piece of advice, it's hard to come up with just one piece, which is why I wasn't raring to go first. But I guess a piece of advice that I would offer is to as you work on your applications, or as you begin to look at your application process and what schools you're going to apply to and what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, it's important for you to really center yourself and to block out any outside noise. And what I mean by that, it is very easy to get caught up in what other people are telling you about what you should be doing. You know, you might hear people saying you should apply to those schools. You should only apply to, you know, T14 schools. You should only do this, or you shouldn't apply to those schools, or, you know, and people are well-meaning. Sometimes people are well-meaning. It can be family, it can be parents who might be saying, or they might tell you in February, you need to apply to law school this year. You need, you know, like I know that you aren't going to go to law school if you don't go right after graduation. And, you know, whatever it is that you're hearing outside of yourself, you know what it has taken you to get here so far, and you've gotten yourself here so far. And of course, you've gotten here with help and you've gotten here with support. And that's awesome. But at the same time, you're the one coming to class every day. You're the one that's going to be going to class every day. You're the one that's stepping into that space and claiming it. And so it's really important for you to center yourself and to pay attention to what it is what is important to you, what you value, and where you're going to find the schools that are going to best help you get to those goals that you have. And in presenting yourself in your application, relatedly, it's important for you to think about what you want to say, not what you think the committee wants to hear, not what other people you think might be doing or saying in their applications. You have no control. So many times people ask, how can I stand out? I'm going to sound like everybody else. You have no control over what anyone else is saying in their application. And it has nothing to do with you, quite frankly. Right? And so it's about yourself. And so think about what you want to say, not what you want to say, oh, but that other person probably said something better. Who cares? That other person, you can both go to law school together. You know, it's not an either or, right? It's about what you want to say. How do you want to present yourself to the committee? And in order for you to do that, it's important, like I said, to center yourself, to be thoughtful, and to really think about your reasons for coming to law school, what you want to do, and value and honor the journey that you've had the people that have helped get you there, right? There's honor, there's truth in your story, right? There's something noble about the challenges that you have faced, the challenges maybe that your family or your parents have gone through for you to be at this point. So tell that story. That is really what we want to know. That is where the passion is going to come from, and that is what is going to write an effective personal statement and an application that really shares with the committee why you are going to be a great fit for their program.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the two of you for giving some great responses to the pre-prepared questions. As promised, it's now 7 p.m. So we are going to transition over to our Q&A session, where you members of the audience will be able to ask the questions you have for our law school admissions officers. So this can go two ways. If you have a question, one, you can either use the raise your hand icon function here on Zoom. You raise your hand and we'll call on you so that you can ask your question. Or your second option is to, of course, type it up and post in the chat. What other way works? I'll go ahead and give you all time to possibly come up with some questions if you haven't thought of any, but please feel free to ask any questions you have.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask one of the questions that a student had emailed to us beforehand that wasn't able to make it to the panel today. Her question is when she's able to last take the LSAT. She specifically is interested in applying this fall to UC Irvine Law School, and she wanted to mention that she is interested in the accelerated program at UC Irvine, or if there is an accelerated program for 2 years instead of 3 years. And if there is any consideration, if you do have that program, when the LSAT should be completed by and sent over. And I believe she also mentioned that she was unsure if her application would not be considered complete if she were to submit it this fall and then take the LSAT in January. So that was another student's question.
Yes. So UCI does not have an accelerated program. I'm not sure if maybe she's confusing it with, so there's that, right? There isn't an accelerated program at UCI. If she's confusing it with early decision, then that deadline is November 15th. And if she's interested in applying for that, then the last LSAT that she could have taken is the one that for you, which the scores were just released, the October test. And so she would have needed to have the LSAT by then. It doesn't have to be that one, but it has to be before this one or the one or any others before that. In general, our application deadline is March 15th. And so an LSAT, the last LSAT we will accept is the one that's right after that. I believe it's the late March or early April LSAT. And in terms of whether or not the application will be complete if without an LSAT score, the answer is no. And so we will receive the application, we will hold it, but it will be on hold until we receive the LSAT score. That is if she's or the student is a first-time test taker. If you already have a score on file from a previous administration, then your application technically will be complete. And so it will not be held to wait for another score that comes in. If a score comes in after the fact, while the application is already being already reviewed, then at that point, if it's in review, then the score will be automatically updated with the committee. That's not a problem. If it comes in after, for example, if a decision is made, then at that point, then the student's welcome to ask for, ask the committee to take another look at it.
That was a pretty specific UCI question. I mean, I'm happy to say that it's like kind of similar. Our application deadline is February 15th. And so the last LSAT that you can take, or the last window of LSATs being available, since it's all at home, is the January window. January 16th, I think, is the start of that window. And while there is a February window, I think it's the 12th, that technically falls before our deadline, we wouldn't get those scores until 3 to 4 weeks later. And typically we would have already, moved through most of the admissions process. So while we might get an update, we won't take a first time LSAT or from someone who's taking that in February. It's just kind of too late really to be competitive. We do have a binding early decision program, and just like Asora suggested for Irvine, the deadline for the last LSAT that you could take to be eligible, because the deadline for the ED program is the 15th of November, just passed. It was the October one. So you're looking at taking it sometime between now and January if you want to apply this cycle and you haven't already taken an LSAT.
Okay, and then the next question that a student submitted was, do you offer merit or need-based scholarships or grants? If so, what criteria do you use, and what percentage of students would receive do receive financial aid?
So yes, we offer both. We offer merit-based scholarships as well as need-based grants. And so merit-based scholarships are based on a variety of factors. It's, yes, LSAT score is very important, as is as are your grades, your GPA. But it is not only based on that. We reserve the right to define merit much more broadly, and we look at at your whole application, and the different things that we think are adding value to it, and that can include your work experience, your life experience, diversity, things like that. And so it is a fairly thoughtful process through which scholarships are offered. These are offered by our financial aid office, and you typically will get your scholarship offer. If you don't get it right when you are admitted, then you will get it shortly after, maybe like a week or so after. And in terms of need-based grants are based on need. And so there's a supplemental, we don't require the FAFSA for you to receive a merit-based or to be considered for merit-based scholarships, but we do require the FAFSA and sometimes supplemental parental information for you to be considered for a need-based grant. And so that's something that we encourage students to submit, or similarly, if not the FAFSA, then the Dreamer application as well that you use at the UCs.
Yeah, we do offer both need and merit-based aid. You should consider your application for admission your first and perhaps only application for merit-based aid. There isn't like a second moment where we're asking specifically for additional information, with the exception of a few programmatic scholarships that have other selection processes attached to them with interviews, etc. So just approach your application as if it's got to not just help get you in, but potentially also distinguish you from your peers and sort of express to us why we should really, really want you in our class, which does underscore for us what merit means, which is it's not about LSAT and GPA. We are also doing a holistic review as it relates to merit. So we're going to look at your entire application over again. And that's important to know, which is a really good question. Like, there are a lot of schools where they very much do holistic review in admissions, but then when it comes to scholarships, they're basically kind of looking at LSAT and GPA and have like dollar figures attached to those. So we do total re-review of your application when considering merit-based aid. Unlike UC Irvine, you will not in any case get an admission offer and a financial aid offer at the same time. And in part, that's because we do this sort of comprehensive re-review, but in part, it's also because after you're admitted, we send you a supplemental gift aid application, or we call the SGA, which stands for just that. That you're invited to supply, which will help us learn more about your financial need and also about your eligibility for particular scholarships or other pieces of background information that might be helpful for us to know. So we start making those offers typically around December or January. The way that need works for us, it's not formula driven in the sense of it's not based on last year's income, and it's based on historical socioeconomic obstacles faced. So we ask questions like whether or not while you were growing up, your family received public benefits, or whether you qualified for, a Pell Grant or Cal Grant A or B. whether or not you ever experienced housing insecurity or homelessness, like et cetera, et cetera. Free and reduced lunches as a K through 12 student. Because, you know, even if you have money in your bank account right now, it's not really what we're actually looking for. We're looking for people who've had historic barriers related to socioeconomic status, and where they would not typically have, no matter what's in their account today, they don't typically have the kind of like depth of resource, either personal or familial, that could be tapped to help pay some for law school. So we evaluate people for need entirely separately from merit. I mean, the processes are somewhat aligned, but what I mean by that is that if you have financial need, we sort of score it on a general rubric from like 0 to 4+. If you have financial need and it's high, I don't care what your LSAT or GPA is. If you got in, we're going to give you gift aid related to need-based only. So we don't take people who are needy and then ask whether or not we think they have a high enough GPA to get an award. We provide need-based aid purely as need-based aid. We also do merit-based aid, and some people will qualify for a combination of the two. And then importantly, for our binding early decision program, we guarantee people a $25,000 per year scholarship if they're admitted through binding early decision. That's about the average award that anyone receives. And to answer your question specifically, usually in the neighborhood of 75 to 75% of entering students enter with some form of non-loan aid provided by Berkeley Law. So about 3/4 of the class, and the average award is between $25,000 and $28,000. We do also have what we call a reconsideration process each spring. So if you get an initial gift aid award, or if you don't, if you're one of those 25% who didn't get an initial gift aid award, whether it's need or merit based, you can ask for us to take a second look by applying for reconsideration. That could be in light of another school's offer. So you could be like, Berkeley's my dream, but I got into this school and they offered me $20,000. You guys didn't offer me anything. I would like financial support of X amount in order to be able to come to Berkeley. Or it could be based on need, where you can say, I didn't get a need-based aid award, or I did, but it was only this much. And I need you to know that in the last 2 years, my family's lost their business. I'm helping to support my parents. Like, there's all these sort of changed circumstances. And so I think you need more information about my financial needs so you can reconsider my need-based eligibility. So there's kind of a second bite at the apple, if that makes sense. And we've kept it that way and sort of intentionally keep it that way, in part because one of the things about merit is you're sort of guessing like who wants to come to your school and who you want, and you've never really interacted with them. But the nice thing about reconsideration is usually you've had a chance to visit, we've had a chance to get to know you, and we have a smaller group of people who we know Berkeley really is their first choice. And the reason they're not able to say yes yet is money. And so if we can take money off the table as an issue, those people who most should be at Berkeley will be able to come. Oh, can I just answer Leslie's question about class size? Really
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
So typical is a great question. This year's class was too big. So too big. I mean, they're wonderful, but it was 385 students. That's not what we were aiming for. We were aiming for 325 students. The previous year's class, we were at 350 students. So it did not go in the direction that we wanted, even though we admitted far fewer students. I will say that this year we are targeting a lower class size, even than that 320 to 325. So to be determined precisely what that is, we have a little bit of a range that we're looking forward to. Historically, about 10 years ago, we were 270. And then we moved to about 320. And I expect that this year we'll land somewhere in between the two.
Our class size is much smaller than that. So our this year's class size was 170 students. The year before it was about 160. So we're usually between 140 and 160. This last class was also a little bigger than we anticipated.
Perfect. So one of the questions that was submitted privately in the chat was regarding for college students who are applying, who are transfer students who went through community college and then transferred to the university. And that question is, when you're reviewing their application, specifically their GPA, will you be reviewing the GPA as a whole regarding the GPA both from community college and at Berkeley, or will more emphasis be put on their upper division major GPA at their respective university?
I think we're probably going to say, so. Well, we may say similar things. I don't know. You can wildly disagree with me. So everybody gets looked at the same way, regardless of whether you went to community college or all through a 4-year, whether you're graduating this May or you graduated 20 years ago, or whether it's private, public, international, whatever, which is to say that the question really isn't about GPA, it's about your academic record. So the courses that you took, the rigor of your course of study, grade trends, and our sort of general assessment of your potential to come to Berkeley Law and be academically successful. And so, it's not the case that we take your undergraduate GPA if you're a transfer student and somehow throw out what you did as a community college student. We care. I mean, just like anyone else who has 4 years of an academic record or more, you have 4 years of an academic record. We're going to look at your entire academic record. Because the question is, can you come to Berkeley and thrive academically? It is helpful then to have the evaluation be closely aligned in terms of looking at courses and performance in the context that might be similar to the courses and performance at Berkeley Law. So if you transferred from Berkeley City College to the University of California, Berkeley, your cumulative GPA will just be a combination of the two. And we would still look at your same grade trends and look for all of the same kind of features and factors for anyone else. But I will say that we will, if it was a close call in particular, in terms of your track record, there might be more of an emphasis on how you did at Berkeley, because we think it's more similar and relevant to how you might do at Berkeley Law. One big caveat though, because transfer students worry about this a lot, is that we totally understand if in the first semester upon transferring, there's an adjustment period. So one thing that's true is that sometimes people are really, stellar students at community college, and then they come to Berkeley and they're kind of just finding their footing. This is a big place. I went here, depending on your major, you might be sitting in a lecture hall with hundreds of people, going to feel really impersonal. So that is not going to be the death of your application. We do obviously hope that then you kind of make the transition and do well at Berkeley or at the 4-year institution. But we are not looking for perfection. We're looking for other kinds of skills, often underlying talent, but also certainly resiliency, et cetera.
I agree with Kristen. The only thing I would add, I'm not going to repeat what everything that she said because she said it perfectly. The only thing that I would add or kind of expound on is with when you apply, this is something to be aware of. When you transfer into a 4-year institution, a lot of times the 4-year institution accepts the work you did in community college, but they don't count it in your GPA. And so your GPA is only based on the work you're doing at the 4-year institution. I'm not sure if that's the case at Berkeley, but I know it's the case at UCI, and I've had it from some of the other UCs as well. And so students have a GPA that they report and that is on their transcript that is only based on their work at the 4-year institution. Be aware that when you apply to law school, your GPA is going to be, as Kristen mentioned, cumulative. And so it's going to be based on everything that you have done that counts towards your 4-year degree. That includes community college. And even if you did community college primarily at Berkeley City, but then you came to LA for a week, for a couple months, and you did a class at LACC, suddenly that is also going to count. And so just be aware that your GPA, if you have community college transfer credit, that will count in a way that maybe it's not being counted as part of your overall GPA, and that sometimes takes people by surprise. So be aware, because sometimes if you did super well at the community college, that might help. Or sometimes if you really found your stride when you got to the 4-year institution and did really well, but maybe just struggle a little bit in the community college, and that might bring down your cumulative GPA. And so just be mindful of that.
Okay, thank you. And that will conclude our Q&A event. I'll go ahead and also ask the panelists if you're both comfortable enough. We welcome you to post your email or contact information for the students who joined us today and who will be watching this recording later. If they're able to contact you with any further questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat. And we'd also like to let everyone know if you're still comfortable with taking a quick screenshot photo. We're going to take a picture of everyone together on the Zoom. We took a couple photos from the live classroom that we're in now. And then we'll go ahead and let you know with a 3, 2, 1 countdown with 1 moment. You can take. If everyone's able to put on their camera. Okay. Very good. Okay. 3, 2, oh,
Do you want to get everyone in this one?
yeah, you can. Sorry, we just didn't take it.
Get
Adjusting.
everyone here. You want to like scoot just a bit? All right, there we go.
It's this one. Okay.
All right, perfect. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay, thank you. And one final announcement. Please, everyone, please make sure to fill out the membership form. We have been collecting the wonderful resources that our 2 officers have been distributing, as well as their emails and contact informations to their respective admissions offices, and we'll be using the membership form to collect your emails and distribute that information to you all. And we also have an upcoming social event right before Dead Week comes up, which is our finals week. And this is just going to be on November 14th. We're going to be getting coffee, some drinks together, and just having a de-stressing moment and having and building some comunidad within our organization. And that's going to be November 14th from about 12 to 1:30, right in front of Berkeley Law. We're going to go to Cafe Strata and come over and just regroup. And one more thank you, very appreciative to our 2 panelists who have come tonight. Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
You know where to find us.
Thank you for having
All
me.
right, muchas gracias. Thank you, like always, for coming here tonight. We really appreciate your help. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.